Now this is where the fun begins. I have made it this far, the Force is strong with me. And I really need to move my ass if I want to review all the Star Wars films before December 15th. Revenge of the Sith was the third installment in George Lucas's prequel trilogy, and it goes without saying that this is the best of the prequels. Though that might not be saying much. Visually, at the very least, this was the best we've seen out of the three films. The technology and graphics had come a long way since Attack of the Clones. I mean, that whole opening space battle sequence was a pretty good indicator of that, even though it ran way too long and more than half of it could have been taken out. The same could be said for a lot in this movie. Like the other two prequels, Episode 3 had its share of flaws, weak points, hits and misses, and a few jokes or silly moments that didn't quite land. But I do enjoy these films for what they are, and in defense of the prequels, the stories were good but the execution was bad. Nevertheless, Revenge of the Sith is a far superior movie to its predecessors, because this is where it all comes to a head. We all knew what was coming. Seeds were planted in the first two films as well as in the Clone Wars, and here in Episode 3, it all comes to fruition. We see the war come to its climactic end, the Sith return, the Jedi fall, the Empire rise, and the birth of Darth Vader. Anakin's turn to the dark side seemed to come about rather quickly, but the motivations behind his turn is something we can all relate to. He was motivated by love and manipulated by fear. That scene between Palpatine and Anakin in the Opera House where he tells the story of Darth Plagueis was probably the best scene between those two characters and one of the better scenes in the entire movie.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi.
You can see Palpatine's manipulation of the young Jedi as he plays to his ambitions and desires just as he had in Episode 2. The deception is there as Palpatine tells the story, but you can't tell whether he's making it all up or if he's referring to his former master and him being the apprentice who slays him. That story is later explored and expanded upon in novels where Palpatine is in fact Plagueis' apprentice. It was said that Darth Vader helped the Empire hunt down and destroy the Jedi Knights, and here we see Anakin leading a battalion of troopers into the Jedi Temple, and clone troopers across the galaxy take out all remaining Jedi and seize control of whatever system they are in, all thanks to a genetic preconditioning called Order 66, which proves just how brilliant and patient Palpatine had been in his plans for total conquest. Seeing the Jedi fall at the hands of the troopers under their command, you feel that betrayal, and John Williams' score adds an eerie and tragic vibe to it. And in the third act, if the scenes with Anakin and Padme staring at each other across the city, or the attack on the Jedi Temple, or the slaughter of the younglings didn't pull on your heartstrings, then something's wrong with you. And finally, the epic showdown we had all been waiting for ever since we first got wind of the prequels. The battle between Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The lightsaber battles between both Obi-Wan and Anakin and Yoda and Palpatine were one of, if not the biggest, highlights of this movie. We've seen Yoda kick ass before in a frantic lightsaber duel, but here the stakes are higher as he's up against a far more powerful Sith Lord than Dooku. And the battle between Anakin and Obi-Wan hit so many emotional highs that it was by far the more intense battle out of the two. This is where Anakin's anger, fear, resentment, jealousy, and arrogance all reach a breaking point. And it's ultimately where he betrays everything and everyone he loved in that single moment of rage. And again, John Williams' musical score just adds to the intensity. By now, after watching this movie several times over, we can all agree that the Anakin vs. Obi-Wan battle was a little too long-winded, and you can clearly see the well-choreographed moves frame for frame. But what makes this battle so impressive and still enjoyable to watch is the fact that Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen did that entire battle themselves. In the movie, stunt doubles were used where needed. But for that final battle, these guys trained and rehearsed for weeks, if not months, to give us that epic battle we'd all been waiting for. For many fans, all we want to see are lightsaber battles. And ever since Episode 1, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of fans out there who have gone and made their own Star Wars or lightsaber fan films. And a lot of them are quite popular on the internet. And speaking of lightsaber battles, if Anakin didn't show up during that battle between Mace and Palpatine, oh yeah, Mace would have smoked him. But then we wouldn't have the original trilogy now, would we? Star Wars fans already know everything I've mentioned in these reviews and then some. There's not much else I can say other than we each take something away from these movies that we find entertaining, enduring, or inspiring. Despite their many obvious flaws, these films are still enjoyable. The digital effects in this movie were far better than in Episode 2. Yoda looked more convincing, and it was cool to see how Palpatine seized control, and to see what brought Anakin to the dark side. As a kid, I never questioned how or why Vader became Vader. I mean, that's just who and what he was, the bad guy. But learning that he was once a good guy who became twisted and evil over reasons such as love and fear kind of changed my perspective a little. It gave tragedy to the character, and you actually empathize with the baddest of badasses. There are many fans out there who would say that the prequels turned Vader into a little bitch, and I can agree with that to an extent. But when it comes to watching the original trilogy, I tend to shut everything else out and forget that the prequels ever existed and just enjoy the trilogy as I remember them. As I mentioned before, despite our dislike of the prequels, we wouldn't have the Star Wars we have today if not for them. The digital technology used in the prequels helped to better visualize the Star Wars universe. The latest Star Wars films still use a lot of visuals, but they have found the perfect marriage between practical and digital effects. Whereas the prequels were 99.9% blue screen sets and CGI. So to give credit where credit is due, I'm giving Star Wars Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith a Titan rating of 8 out of 10. Not a perfect film as far as Star Wars movies go, but it is without question the best of the prequels. So that does it for my review of the Star Wars prequels. I'm Titan McDougal, and thanks for watching, guys. I do appreciate it. Whatever your thoughts, share them in the comment box. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for my review of Rogue One, and I will see you on the next Titan review. May the Force be with you.